The air in the high country always smelled of pine resin and damp earth, a scent that for Sarah was the very definition of home. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral, 3 weeks since she had buried the woman who was her mother, father, and best friend all rolled into one. Standing on the porch of the rustic cabin, Sarah looked out over the 50-acre expanse of Willow Creek. It was a hidden paradise tucked away from the frantic pace of the city, where the only deadlines were set by the rising sun and the changing seasons. Her grandmother, Margaret Chen, had always been a woman of mystery and immense kindness. She had left Sarah this land, a gift that felt more like a heavy responsibility than a luxury. "The land has a heartbeat, Sarah," Margaret used to say while braiding Sarah's hair on this very porch. "If you listen to it, it will tell you how to live. If you protect it, it will protect you." Sarah was trying to listen. That Saturday morning, she was focused on a simple task, building a small stone fire pit. She needed the physical labor to drown out the noise of her grief. She was stacking smooth river stones when the silence of the woods was shattered by the sharp, rhythmic clack-clack-clack of expensive shoes hitting the gravel driveway. The confrontation. "Excuse me, just what do you think you're doing?" The voice was like a serrated knife. Sarah stood up, dusting soot from her jeans, to find a woman marching toward her. She looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of towering pines. Dressed in designer athleisure that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, her blonde hair was pulled into a ponytail so tight it seemed to stretch her eyes into a permanent glare. Her manicured nails, painted a predatory shade of red, pointed directly at the half-finished fire pit. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice slightly raspy from disuse. "I'm just building a fire pit." "On whose property?" the woman demanded, her face twisting with a mix of disgust and self-importance. "This is a private residential area. We have strict codes against open flames, unapproved structures, and whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at Sarah's rusted 1998 pickup truck which sat parked near the cabin. "I think there's a misunderstanding," Sarah said, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm Sarah. I inherited this cabin and the surrounding acreage from my grandmother, Margaret." The woman let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Inherited? Honey, I don't care if you inherited the moon. This entire valley is under the jurisdiction of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. I'm Linda Vane, the president of the HOA. I've lived here for 6 years and I have never seen you, nor did I ever see some grandmother in this eyesore of a shack. This cabin is a violation of at least a dozen regulations. It's a blight on our property values." Sarah felt a cold spark of anger. "This shack has been here since the 1950s. My grandmother lived here for 50 years. "Then she was a ghost," Linda snapped. "Because I run this neighborhood with an iron fist. You're clearly a squatter and that truck belongs in a junkyard, not parked next to million-dollar estates. You have 30 minutes to pack your bags before I have you forcibly removed." "Ma'am, please, I don't want any trouble. I'm grieving. I just want to be left alone." "Save your sob story for someone who cares," Linda said, pulling out her latest model iPhone with dramatic flair. "I'm calling the authorities. I have connections in the county and I promise you by sunset you'll be sitting in a cell or on the side of the highway." The arrival of the law. Sarah retreated into the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched through the lace curtains as Linda paced the driveway, gesturing wildly and shouting into her phone. 20 minutes later, the blue and red lights of 2 squad cars reflected off the pine needles. Sarah didn't panic. Instead, she went to the heavy oak desk in the corner and pulled out a thick leather folio. Inside were the documents her grandmother's attorney, Mr. Patterson, had handed her with a solemn nod just days ago. A heavy knock sounded at the door. When Sarah opened it, she found 2 officers. The older one, Officer Martinez, had a weathered face and kind eyes. The younger one, Officer Chen, looked like he was ready for a fight. "Ma'am, we had a report of a trespasser and a hostile squatter," Martinez said. "That would be me, apparently," Sarah replied, stepping back to let them in. "But I think the hostility was one-sided. Would you like some coffee? My grandmother always said that no matter how bad the news is, it's better shared over a hot cup." Martinez's expression softened instantly. "Wait, Margaret's granddaughter, you're Sarah." "I am." "Margaret was a saint," Martinez told his younger partner. "She used to bring 3 dozen homemade cinnamon rolls to the station every Christmas Eve. I'm so sorry for your loss, Sarah." "Thank you, officer, but Linda out there seems to think I'm a criminal." Sarah spread the documents on the kitchen table. There was the original deed, the land survey, and the specific lease agreements. As the officers reviewed the papers, Linda burst through the door without knocking. "Why isn't she in handcuffs?" Linda shrieked. "I told you she's trespassing, she's building illegal structures, she's a hazard to the community." Officer Chen turned, his hand resting on his belt. "Ma'am, you need to wait outside, we are conducting an investigation." "I am the president of the HOA, I have a right to be here." "You have a right to stay behind the yellow tape if I have to pull it out," Chen said firmly. "Out, now." Once the door clicked shut, Martinez looked up from the deed, a look of pure astonishment on his face. "Sarah, does that woman realize what she's living on?" "I don't think she has a clue," Sarah whispered. "Well," Martinez chuckled, "this is going to be an interesting afternoon." The hidden truth. The officers walked back out to the driveway where Linda was waiting, looking smug. She crossed her arms, expecting Sarah to be let out in chains. "Well, are we taking her in?" Linda asked. "No, ma'am," Martinez said, his voice echoing in the quiet woods. "In fact, we've verified the documents. Ms. Sarah Chen is the sole legal owner of this 50-acre tract. That includes the land under the road, the land under the community park, and, interestingly enough, the land under your house, Ms. Vane." Linda's face went from a triumphant pink to a ghostly, sickly white. "What? That's impossible. I bought my house, I own my lot." "You own the structure," Sarah said, stepping onto the porch. "But my grandmother never sold the land. She granted 30-year land leases. It seems you didn't read your closing documents very carefully when you moved in." Linda staggered back as if she'd been slapped. This is some kind of trick. I'll sue, I'll call the board." "You do that," Martinez said. "But for now, leave this young woman alone. She is the landlord. You are, technically, her tenant." The audit. The following Monday, Sarah sat in the mahogany-lined office of Mr. Patterson. He was a man who looked like he belonged in a different century with his gold pocket watch and fountain pens. "Your grandmother was a visionary, Sarah," Patterson said, sliding a ledger across the desk. "She saw this valley being destroyed by developers, so she sold the houses but kept the land to ensure the forest would never be clear-cut. However, she grew tired in her later years. She allowed the HOA to form to handle the day-to-day maintenance. It seems Linda Vane took that power and ran with it." As they dug into the HOA's financial records, which Patterson had subpoenaed, the picture grew grim. Linda had been raising amenity fees by 20% every year. She had charged residents thousands in fines for minor infractions like the wrong shade of curtains or grass that was half an inch too long. "Look at this," Sarah pointed to a line item. $40,000 for landscape consultation paid to a company called Vane and Associates. That's her own firm. "It's embezzlement," Patterson sighed. "And Sarah, there's one more thing. Linda's specific 30-year land lease, it expires in exactly 60 days. Because she was so aggressive in cleaning up the neighborhood, she never checked the renewal date on her own dirt." The final stand. 2 weeks later, Sarah called a mandatory meeting of all residents. She held it at the cabin, setting out circles of chairs on the grass. She baked 3 batches of her grandmother's cookies. The residents arrived looking terrified. They had been living under Linda's tyranny for years. There was Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, an elderly couple who looked like they hadn't slept in weeks. There was a young father holding a toddler, looking worried about his back dues. Linda arrived last, wearing a power suit as if it were armor. She sat in the front row, glaring. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began. Her voice shook at first, but she felt a warm breeze brush her cheek, a reminder of her grandmother. "I know many of you have received letters from the HOA demanding thousands of dollars. I want you to know that those letters are void. As the owner of the land, I am dissolving the current HOA board effective immediately." A collective gasp went up. "I've spent the last week looking at the books," Sarah continued, looking directly at Linda. "I found that many of you were overcharged. I will be issuing refunds for every illegal fine collected over the last 3 years. Furthermore, I am offering everyone here a new 50-year lease at a fixed nominal rate. You will never have to worry about being priced out of your homes again." Mrs. Johnson burst into tears, clutching her husband's hand. The young father let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. "You can't do this," Linda screamed, standing up. "I have a contract." "Actually, Linda," Mr. Patterson stood up, holding a document. "Your lease expires in 45 days. And under the good character clause written by Margaret Chen, the landowner has the right to refuse renewal if the tenant has caused significant harm to the community. We have evidence of embezzlement, harassment, and fraud. The silence that followed was heavy. Linda looked around the circle. For the first time, she saw not subjects to be ruled, but neighbors she had hurt. She saw the fear in the Johnsons' eyes, fear she had put there. Her shoulders slumped, the armor cracked. She sank back into her chair and began to sob, not a loud, angry cry but a quiet, broken sound. I lost everything in my divorce," she whispered. "The house was all I had left. I thought if I controlled everything I'd be safe. I'm so sorry." A new morning. 6 months later, the valley of Willow Creek looked different. The perfect, manicured lawns had been replaced by wilder, natural gardens. The heavy gates at the entrance were always open. Sarah sat on her porch, watching the smoke curl from her now-completed fire pit. Linda was there, too, not as a president but as a volunteer. She was helping Mr. Johnson plant a new row of hemlocks. She had stayed, though her house was now under a strict probationary lease. She was in therapy, and while the healing was slow, it was happening. Sarah looked at the 50 acres of pines and felt the magic her grandmother had promised. It wasn't spells or enchantments, it was the simple, profound power of choosing kindness over control. She picked up a photo of Margaret and smiled. The legacy wasn't the land, it was the peace that now lived upon it.